Know we love digging into the topics you're most curious about, and this one is no exception. We've got a ton of really interesting stuff to unpack today, all focused on organizational resilience.
It's such a hot topic right now.
Yeah, and for good reason. I mean, think about it. The world has been throwing some serious curveballs lately, right? You've got pandemics, economic, well, everything, geopolitical tensions, it's a lot. And it really seems to be separating the organizations that can adapt and bounce back from the ones that, well, don't. So we're going to get into all that today. We're going to really dissect what makes an organization resilient, why it matters more than ever, and how to actually build it.
I think a lot of people hear resilience and think it's just about like bouncing back from a disaster, right? But it's so much more than that.
Yeah, it's more like having that inherent ability to adapt no matter what comes your way. It's almost like having a good immune system. If you're healthy overall, you're less likely to get sick in the first place. And even if you do, you're probably going to bounce back faster. It's like that for organizations too.
It's a great analogy.
So with that in mind, let's start by laying some groundwork. What exactly is organizational resilience? How do we even define it?
Well, the International Standards Organization, ISO, they put out a standard back in 2017, ISO 22316, and they define it as an organization's ability to adapt within a complex and constantly changing environment.
Okay, so being able to adjust to change, basically.
Exactly. It's not just about surviving a specific event. It's about having that built-in capacity to navigate constant change, whether it's sudden or gradual, expected or completely out of left field.
And this is where we get into the whole VUCA world thing, right?
Yeah.
Volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. It sounds a little intimidating, to be honest.
It is intimidating. But that's exactly why resilience is so important. In a VUCA world, the ability to adapt becomes your biggest asset, maybe even the defining factor for success.
It's like having a really good GPS system in your car.
How so?
Well, think about it. If you're on a road trip and there's a sudden detour, a good GPS will reroute you no problem.
Ah, I see what you mean.
But if you're stuck with an old, clunky system, you're going to be lost and frustrated. It's the same with organizations. The more resilient you are, the better you can adapt to those unexpected detours and keep moving forward.
Absolutely. And the ERM Innovation Special Interest Group actually broke down resilience into two key aspects, which I think is really helpful. There's operational resilience and strategic resilience.
Okay, so two sides of the same coin. What's the difference?
Operational resilience is all about maintaining those essential services and functions even during a disruption. Think of it like keeping the lights on.
Okay, like essential services.
Right. So if a power company has good operational resilience, they're going to be able to keep providing electricity to hospitals and emergency services during a major storm, for example.
Got it. Keeping the core functions running. And then strategic resilience.
Strategic resilience is more about the big picture. It's about how an organization adapts its overall strategies, its goals, its direction in response to those big changes in the external environment.
So it's not just about weathering the storm, it's about actually charting a new course based on the changing landscape.
Exactly. It's about seeing those changes coming, maybe even before others do, and being able to pivot your strategy to take advantage of them or at least minimize the negative impact.
That's where you can actually turn a crisis into an opportunity, right?
Exactly. You see companies doing this all the time. They might completely revamp their business model, enter new markets, or even create entirely new products or services based on those shifting conditions.
It's about being proactive and thinking ahead. Now, one thing that often comes up in discussions about resilience is business continuity planning, or BCP, as it's often called. How does that relate to this bigger idea of organizational resilience? Are they the same thing?
They are definitely related, but they're not the same thing. Think of business continuity planning as being very event-focused.
Okay, so specific scenarios.
Right. So BCP is all about preparing for specific events or disruptions, like a natural disaster, a cyber attack, or a major equipment failure. And it usually involves having very detailed plans in place for how to respond and recover from each of those specific events.
So it's like having a fire escape plan. You know what to do if a fire breaks out, but it doesn't necessarily help you prevent the fire in the first place.
Exactly. Resilience, on the other hand, is more holistic. It encompasses BCP, but it also includes all those other factors we've been talking about, like adaptability, agility, leadership, culture. It's about building a more resilient organization overall, so you're better equipped to handle any kind of disruption, even those you haven't specifically planned for.
So BCP is kind of like one piece of the resilience puzzle.
Exactly. It's an important piece, but it's not the whole picture.
Now, the ISO standard we mentioned earlier, that ISO 22316, It actually lays out some key principles from ISO 22316, 2017. It says organizational resilience is an organization's ability to adapt within a complex and constantly changing environment.
Right.
Sounds a little abstract, don't you think?
Yeah, it's kind of like a high-level starting point, you
Yeah.
know. But it gets more practical when you look at how the Institute of Risk Management, or IRM, breaks it down.
Okay.
IRM Innovation Special Interest Group, that's the full name.
Okay.
They highlight two main areas: operational resilience and strategic resilience.
Gotcha. Two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. So first, you have operational resilience, and this is all about keeping those essential things running, making sure the critical services don't stop even if there's some disruption.
Right, like keeping the lights on no matter what.
Yeah, exactly. Like imagine a power company after a hurricane, they have to make sure the electricity keeps flowing.
Yeah, the absolute essentials.
Exactly. Now, strategic resilience, that's about taking a longer view.
Okay.
It's how an organization changes its big picture strategies to not only survive, but to maybe even come out ahead.
So not just reacting to change, but using it to your advantage.
Exactly. Think of a traditional store that switches to online sales when everyone starts shopping online.
Right, smart move.
Adapting to what people want.
I see. So it's not just about damage control, but turning change into an opportunity.
That's it.
Now, the article mentions this whole thing about navigating a VUCA world: volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous.
Yeah, great acronym. Right.
It really captures how unpredictable things are these days, wouldn't you say?
It really does. And that's why this whole idea of organizational resilience is so important now.
Mm-hmm. We can't always see the next crisis coming.
Nope.
But we can try to be ready for almost anything.
Exactly. Now, there's something important the article brings up: the difference between organizational resilience and BCP.
BCP.
Business continuity planning.
Oh, right. BCP. Yeah, a lot of people know about that. What's the difference, though?
Think of BCP as being super focused on specific events. It's about having those plans in place to be ready for something bad and to get back on your feet afterward.
Gotcha.
Like, what if we can't use our main office anymore? What about backing up all our data?
Right. Practical stuff.
Yeah. But organizational resilience, that's much bigger.
Bigger picture.
Yeah, it includes BCP, but also tackles those trickier, ongoing problems that can really hurt an organization.
So BCP is like having a super detailed emergency plan,
Mhm.
whereas organizational resilience is about making the whole organization flexible and strong no matter what comes up.
You got it. That's a great way to put it.
Awesome. So now the article goes into the core principles of organizational resilience from that ISO 22316 standard.
Right.
And there are a lot of them.
Yeah, there are quite a few. It's a whole framework.
Where do we even start with all these?
Well, I think the first one's really important: the principle of alignment.
Alignment.
Yeah, like having everyone in the organization on the same page.
Right.
Everyone understands the goals, they know what the organization is trying to achieve, and most importantly, they get why it matters. Why are we doing this?
That makes a lot of sense.
Uh-huh.
If everybody's pulling in the same direction, they'll be better at overcoming those hurdles.
Definitely. You're much stronger as a team.
So what's next on the list?
Okay, so the next principle is about staying up to date.
Staying up to date with what?
With everything, both internally and externally. The organization needs a really clear picture of what's going on inside, its strengths and weaknesses.
Like an internal audit?
Kind of, but also looking outside, at market trends, what the competition's doing, new risks popping up, and any opportunities out there.
So being vigilant, having your finger on the pulse.
Exactly. An organization can't be resilient if it's ignoring what's happening around it. It has to be aware.
Right, makes sense. Okay, so what else is there?
Well, then there's this principle about being able to handle shocks and changes.
Oh, that sounds like the heart of resilience.
Yeah, it really is. It means having the resources, the skills, the flexibility to not only withstand something unexpected, but to learn from it and change course if you have to.
So you're not just surviving, you're learning and getting stronger.
That's the goal. And to do that, you need strong governance and management. That's the next principle.
So having good leadership and reliable processes is key to being able to absorb those shocks and keep going.
Absolutely. They provide the framework to make decisions and take action effectively.
Okay, so strong foundation, good leadership, those are all important. What else is on the list?
The article also talks about the importance of diversity, having different skills and perspectives.
Oh, diversity in all senses.
Yeah, in every way. Different skills, leadership styles, knowledge, experiences.
Like a diverse team will be better at handling challenges.
Exactly. You avoid blind spots, you get more creative solutions.
It's like a Like having a stronger immune system.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. More diversity, better defenses.
Interesting. So what's next?
Well, the standard also talks about collaboration and coordination, both within the organization and with outside experts if needed.
Okay, so break down those silos we talked about before
Yeah.
and get input from different people.
Absolutely. Resilience isn't just one department's job, it's everyone's responsibility.
The team effort.
Definitely. And finally, effective risk management. That's critical.
Right, which brings us back to that whole thing about understanding the threats and opportunities out there.
Exactly. You have to know what you're up against.
So the article then kind of takes us back in time looking at how this idea of organizational resilience has developed. It talks about it starting in IT back in the 90s, then moving to business continuity in the 2000s.
Yeah, it's helpful to see how it's evolved.
Definitely. So in the beginning, it was all about getting the computers back online after a crash, right?
Yeah, like how do we recover our tech systems after something goes wrong?
Okay.
And then it broadened to include business continuity, keeping those vital business processes running.
Right, keeping the business afloat.
Exactly. And then in 2006, when the International Consortium for Organizational Resilience was formed, that's when things started to shift towards a more complete view.
Right, and now it's not just about IT or even just the business itself, it's about the whole ecosystem.
All the stakeholders.
Suppliers, customers, even governments, everyone's in the mix.
It's a big web of interconnectedness.
Right. The article also mentions some standards like BSI 65000 and ISO 22316
Yeah, those are like blueprints.
for building resilience.
Yeah, they offer frameworks and guidance based on best practices.
Practical tools.
Exactly. ISO 22316, for example, it takes a holistic approach to resilience, emphasizing how important it is to integrate different management practices.
Okay, interesting. Now, the article specifically calls out how the financial sector is really focusing on resilience.
Oh yeah, definitely. Especially when it comes to managing operational risks, they have to be extra careful because of how interconnected everything is.
Right, one bank goes down and it could trigger a domino effect.
Exactly. So they often have to keep extra capital reserves just in case.
Like a safety net for the whole system.
That's the idea. And the article points out that this whole concept is still developing.
Still evolving.
Yeah, especially with all the global risks that keep popping up.
Yeah, it makes sense. So, how do organizations actually build this resilience in the real world?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
The article itself admits that it's not a simple static thing and that it's hard to measure.
Yeah, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. But it does offer some practical ideas.
Okay, let's hear them.
One of the big things is breaking down those silos we keep talking about, like what happened with enterprise risk management or ERM.
Okay, so just like with ERM, resilience shouldn't be confined to one team or department.
Exactly. It needs to be a company-wide effort.
Gotcha. So, what else?
Well, the article highlights how crucial it is to have an adaptable workforce and flexible processes.
Right, employees need to be able to roll with the punches.
Exactly. The article calls employees the most valuable asset in building resilience.
I can see that.
Mm-hmm.
And the pandemic really showed us how important that is.
Oh, absolutely. We saw people shifting to remote work, and their dedication was amazing.
Yeah, they kept things going.
Yeah, they were the backbone of a lot of companies during that time. And leaders had to be agile and creative.
It was a real test of leadership.
It was. And it really showed the human side of resilience.
So it's not just about systems and processes.
It's about people.
It's about people.
Right. And the article also points out the importance of the whole ecosystem.
Ecosystem.
Like your suppliers, customers, even the government.
Right, everyone's interconnected.
Exactly. You need strong relationships with them because their resilience affects your resilience.
We really saw that during the pandemic, didn't we?
Oh, yeah, for sure. We all had to figure out how to work together in a whole new way.
Now, the article mentions something interesting about the pandemic.
What's that?
It says that some companies kind of went overboard with focusing on profits,
Ah, yeah, I see what you mean.
and they kind of forgot about other things.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it happened. Some companies got so focused on the bottom line that they lost sight of other important things.
Right, they lost sight of the bigger picture.
Yeah, but on the other hand, there were also some really inspiring examples.
Oh, yeah, like who?
Like the NHS.
Right, those frontline workers.
Yeah, they really stepped up and put service above everything else.
It's amazing what people can do when they come together.
It really is. It shows the power of human connection.
Okay, so the article then talks about how there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to resilience.
Oh, yeah, that's a big point.
Like, you can't always predict how people will react under pressure.
Nope, human behavior can be unpredictable.
And sometimes even small decisions can have huge long-term consequences.
It's true. It's like a butterfly effect.
Right, you never know what will tip the scales.
And you always have to balance what you need right now with what you'll need in the future.
It's a juggling act for sure.
Definitely. The article makes it clear that resilience isn't an exact science.
Right, you can't just plug it into a formula.
No, it's much more nuanced than that.
You can plan and do simulations,
You can try to be as prepared as possible.
but how resilient you really are, that only comes out when you're actually in a crisis.
Yeah, that's when you see what you're really made of.
And even with the best plans, things don't always go as expected.
That's life, right?
The article mentions how important it is to have benchmarks to measure how things are actually going.
Right. You need a way to track your progress and see if you're meeting your goals.
And then learn from any gaps between what you planned and what actually happened.
Exactly. You have to be able to adjust and adapt.
But in a really bad crisis, sometimes you don't have time to implement all your fancy systems.
Yeah, sometimes you just have to make quick decisions.
And by then, it might be too late.
Right. So it's crucial to build that resilience beforehand.
So you're ready for anything.
Exactly. You want to be proactive, not reactive.
Okay, I like that. So now the article talks about data.
Ah, data, the lifeblood of modern business.
And it says that organizations should start with the data they already have, like from their ERP and CRM systems.
That's smart. It avoids wasted effort and makes sure everyone's working with the same information.
Right, consistent data.
Yeah, and it can help you spot vulnerabilities and track key metrics.
So don't underestimate the power of the data you already have.
Absolutely. Use it to build a solid foundation.
Now, the article also talks about bringing in outside data and managing unstructured data, like from social media.
Right. That's a whole other challenge.
It is, but the point is to build a complete picture.
Like a jigsaw puzzle, you need all the pieces.
Exactly. Now, there's this diagram in the article.
Oh, the one about operational resilience.
Yeah, it shows how operational resilience comes from different areas like business continuity, crisis management, and risk management.
Right. But it also points out that these areas often work separately within organizations.
Yeah, different teams, different silos.
It's like everyone's focusing on their own little area and not talking to each other.
And that can be a problem, right?
Yeah, because you need a unified view of resilience across the whole organization.
The article suggests blending these disciplines together.
Right, a more integrated approach.
So everyone's working towards the same goal.
Exactly. And this ties into ERM, Enterprise Risk Management.
Okay, how so?
Well, the idea is to think of resilience as something that emerges naturally from good management and control systems across the whole company.
So it's not a separate function, it's woven into everything.
Right. ERM needs to evolve beyond just identifying risks.
To actively building resilience.
Exactly. And learning from both successes and failures.
Makes sense. Now, the article brings up something interesting.
What's that?
It says that resilience is relative. Yeah, like an organization needs to figure out how resilient it needs to be compared to others in its industry or the specific conditions it operates in.
That's an important point. You don't always need to be the most resilient company on the planet.
Right. It depends on your context.
Exactly. You need to find the right balance for your situation.
So now the article goes on to talk about different types of resilience.
Okay, let's hear it.
It contrasts structural resilience, which is about minimizing risk, like with insurance, with more active approaches like absorbing, responding, adapting, and recovering, which are more important in today's unpredictable world.
Right, so structural resilience is more about protecting yourself from harm.
Like putting on armor.
Yeah, but it might not be enough in a rapidly changing environment. You also need to be able to adapt and bounce back.
So what are the other types?
Well, there's robust resilience, which is more about what you do after something bad happens.
Like your disaster recovery plan.
Exactly. It's important for getting back on your feet.
But it's still reacting to something that's already happened.
True. The article suggests that companies need to aim for dynamic resilience.
Dynamic resilience, what's that?
It's all about continuous learning and improvement.
Yeah.
It's about always adapting your business model and processes to stay ahead of the curve.
Proactive rather than reactive.
Exactly. The focus shifts from trying to predict every possible problem to being able to handle whatever comes your way.
Sounds like a much healthier mindset.
It is. It's about building that inner strength.
So how can an organization actually assess its own resilience?
Good question. The article suggests using existing data, like from ERP systems and KPIs.
APIs, key performance indicators.
Yeah, and also KRIs, key risk indicator.
Gotcha. Using the data you already have to measure your resilience.
Exactly. And they provide a table as an example.
A table.
Yeah, it lists different aspects of an organization like geography, market position, product offerings, customer base, and so on.
Okay. A lot of different factors.
Yeah, and for each one, it asks you to consider structural, robust, and dynamic resilience.
So you're assessing different types of resilience for different parts of the business.
That's the idea. It's a helpful way to get a comprehensive picture.
So for each area, you're looking at things like diversification, competitor analysis, brand strength, customer loyalty, and so on.
Right. It's about understanding your strengths and weaknesses in each area.
Makes sense. But the article makes it clear that this table is just a starting point.
Yeah, it's not meant to be exhaustive.
Every company will need to adapt it to their own situation.
Definitely. The key is to use it as a framework to assess your current resilience.
And to remember that you don't need to be the most resilient company in every single area.
Right. It's about finding the right balance for your specific needs and risk tolerance.
And it's an ongoing process, right?
Absolutely. Resilience isn't a one-time thing. You have to keep monitoring and adapting.
Because things are always changing.
Exactly. You got to stay ahead of the curve.
So then the article moves on to talk about risk tech.
Technology to the rescue.
It highlights these more advanced tools, like the SolXR model.
Yeah, these are tools that go beyond just basic monitoring of KPIs and KRIs.
They provide a more dynamic and visual way to track risks.
Exactly. They can help you see how risks are emerging, understand their root causes, and how they might affect different parts of the organization.
And they offer real-time insights.
Yeah, so you can make decisions more quickly and effectively.
That's essential in today's fast-paced world.
It is. And these tools can also improve data integrity by breaking down silos and bringing all the information together.
So, a more holistic view of risk.
That's the goal. And that leads into the discussion about emerging risks.
Right. The article says that the COVID-19 pandemic really exposed some weaknesses in traditional risk management.
It did. A lot of the existing frameworks were designed to deal with what the article calls slow risk clock speed risks.
Slow risk clock speed.
Yeah, risks where you have plenty of time and information to prepare.
Okay.
But emerging risks, like a pandemic, they move much faster.
Right, they come out of nowhere and spread quickly.
Exactly. That's fast risk clock speed.
And those traditional models weren't ready for something like that.
No, they weren't designed for that level of complexity and uncertainty.
So we need to evolve our approach to risk management.
You do. The article emphasizes the need to move beyond just looking at straightforward, predictable risks.
Right, because the world is much more complex than that.
It is. We need to start by taking a strategic view of the whole business, including the human element.
Right, people are a huge part of the equation.
They are. And while you can't always predict everything that will happen,
Especially with these complex emerging risks.
yeah, you can still make progress by following good principles and constantly assessing your situation.
So it's about being adaptable and learning as you go.
Exactly. Operating on that more flexible side of the framework.
Makes sense. Now, the article then dives into how our understanding of risk changes over time.
Okay, how so?
It says that with emerging risks, the early signals are often weak and the data is unreliable.
Right, it's very different from traditional risks, where you usually have more historical data and clearer warning signs.
Yeah, so with emerging risks, it's much harder to assess the likelihood of something happening.
Exactly. And the article highlights those tipping points, those moments when things shift from normal to crisis mode.
Those are the hardest to predict, aren't they?
They are. It's tough to see them coming until it's too late.
And that's where traditional risk management, with its focus on impact and likelihood, can fall short.
Yeah, because you don't always have good data on likelihood with these new emerging risks.
So what's the solution?
The article suggests using scenario analysis.
Scenario analysis.
Yeah, it's about exploring different possible futures, even if you can't say for sure how likely they are.
So thinking through different possibilities.
Exactly. It's about asking why and considering what's possible, not just what's probable.
A more open-minded approach.
Definitely. It helps you prepare for a wider range of outcomes.
Okay, so finally, the article talks about making resilience part of how organizations make decisions.
Right. It's not just about having policies and procedures. It's about having the right mindset.
It's about culture.
Exactly. You need both the data to measure your progress and a culture that values resilience.
And that could be tricky, right?
It can be. Sometimes it's hard to convince people to invest in something that might not happen.
Right. It's hard to see the return on investment for something that didn't happen.
Exactly. But the article emphasizes that being prepared is always better than having to react after the fact.
An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And it mentions some of those risk tech tools we talked about earlier.
Like those dynamic forecasting tools that can help you get a better handle on emerging risks.
Exactly. They can provide valuable insights for scenario planning and horizon scanning.
Helping you stay ahead of the curve.
Right. You have to constantly monitor the market, adapt to digital transformation, and manage the complexities of global supply chains.
It's a lot to keep track of.
It is, but the bottom line is that organizational resilience is a reflection of an organization's values and purpose.
Okay.
It's about building a sustainable future, one that can weather any storm.
And it ties into those ERM principles of interconnectedness, integration, and financial health.
Question that Biswas poses, which
Yeah.
is it risk management that kind of drives an organization's resilience?
Right.
Or does the pursuit of resilience kind of shape how an organization approaches risk management?
Right.
And I think that interplay between those two things is going to be really crucial to what we talk about today.
Yeah, so let's maybe track that evolution of resilience a little bit.
Well-
Because Biswas starts by looking back at like IT disaster recovery in the 90s,
Yeah.
which was really focused on, getting the systems back up.
Right.
And then kind of business continuity sort of came along in the mid 2000s,
Mhm.
and that broadened it out to like keeping essential operations running.
Yeah.
But now it seems like it's this much bigger, like company-wide integrated approach.
Yeah.
It's really about moving from, recovering technology to actually embedding resilience in the whole organization
Right.
and making it this kind of strategic thing, not just a tactical thing.
Yeah. I think what's so interesting about that evolution is that move towards being more holistic and being more proactive.
Okay.
Biswas defines organizational resilience as, being a combination of strategies that protect and allow an organization to respond.
Uh-huh.
But the real crux is proactive integration of ERM,
Okay.
enterprise risk management.
Okay.
And it's about not just surviving, but actually thriving long term
Yeah.
in this constantly changing world. And it's not just theoretical either.
Right.
You've got stuff like the UK Civil Contingencies Act 2004,
Right.
British Standard 65,000 2014,
Right.
and ISO 22316 from 2017,
Uh-huh.
which really highlight how crucial this concept is.
Right. And it's not just about, keeping the lights on, is it?
Yeah.
It's at this, Biswas emphasizes this kind of operational and strategic dimension.
Yeah.
Operationally, it's increasingly about what the outside world sees, like how disruptive is it to customers for your services and products.
Yeah.
But then strategically, it's like safeguarding the organization's future.
Yeah.
And even he says like creating new value in the long run.
Yeah. You can't have one without the other.
Yeah.
You can't serve your customers unless the core of your business is protected.
Okay, so, we've got this working definition of resilience, but how does that differ from things like risk management or business continuity?
That's a good point because those terms get thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things Biswas clarifies is that business continuity is often focused on specific disruptive events and how you bounce back from them, whereas ERM takes a much broader and more strategic lens.
Right.
So resilience becomes kind of the main goal across the whole organization.
Right. So I guess every organization has its own sort of way of looking at this.
Yeah, I think Biswas calls this the resilience universe.
Okay.
It's like your whole ecosystem for how you deal with potential disruptions. And he breaks it down into the proactive things you do,
Right.
which are all about limiting the downside or boosting the upside.
Okay.
Things like strategic foresight
Right.
or regular self-assessments.
Uh-huh.
And then you have your reactive elements,
Okay.
which are what happened if those defenses get breached,
Right.
your business continuity protocols or crisis management stuff.
Right.
And he makes the point that this blend of proactive and reactive will be different for every single organization.
So what is it that ties this resilience universe together?
Well, according to Biswas, it's risk management,
Okay.
specifically ERM.
Okay.
He calls it the critical glue.
Right.
It's not just about identifying risks in silos. It's what makes sure all your resilience efforts work together strategically.
Yeah, I mean, ERM, in this sense, it goes beyond just listing potential problems.
Yeah.
I mean, the setting those thresholds that trigger your proactive strengthening measures,
Yeah.
but also your reactive response plans.
Uh-huh.
And it's about evaluating those like really high impact but low probability risks.
Those black swan events.
Yeah, those black swan events, exactly. And then helping prioritize where to focus limited resources.
Yeah. One of the things that ERM allows you to do is
Yeah.
create a shared understanding across all your different departments.
Okay.
It aligns everyone's efforts with what your risk tolerance is as a company.
That makes sense. And so
Yeah.
by bringing all that data together,
Yeah.
you're getting these different perspectives.
Yeah.
And then you're enabling more consistent and better decision making.
Yeah. BSWAS really emphasizes horizon scanning,
Right.
like actively looking out for future risks, and scenario analysis, imagining different events.
Right. So not just preventing problems, but knowing how to respond if they happen.
Yeah, and risk professionals become these key integrators.
Cool.
They're the ones who connect all the different protective functions.
So mature risk management is like the bedrock here.
Yeah.
But how do you actually go about building and strengthening resilience?
Well, BSWAS really stresses that mature risk management is
Hmm.
absolutely essential.
Okay.
And he actually refers back to a 2015 report by E&Y that really highlighted how risk managers need to anticipate emerging vulnerabilities
Right.
and then build adaptable structures
Right.
and operations that are based on a unified risk culture.
So it's not just like having this plan, written down somewhere.
Right.
It's like part of the organization's DNA.
Yeah, he also talks about the importance of a risk governance framework
Yep.
that not only addresses the risks we know, but also looks for emerging threats and even opportunities.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And he also points out that you need to streamline structures because in a crisis,
Right.
bureaucracy can be a big obstacle.
It can really slow things down.
Yeah, and then there's the human side.
Yeah.
It's about building commitment and ownership.
Okay.
And accountability for risk at every level.
Right.
And actually fostering a culture where you're okay with taking some risks.
Okay.
Because that's how you innovate.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you can have the best frameworks in the world, but if the people aren't engaged, then
it's not going to work.
It's not going to work.
And one really interesting thing that BSWAS says is that a lot of organizations might have the resources they need, but they're not using them right.
Interesting.
So really understanding your strengths and weaknesses is key.
So it's about taking stock
Yeah.
and bringing together all these different viewpoints.
Yeah, he really emphasizes that it's a collaborative effort.
Okay.
You need input from crisis management, business continuity experts,
Mm.
and people with specific knowledge, like epidemiologists or environmental scientists.
Right. Yeah. So you're getting the right expertise for the right situation.
Yeah, he even suggests these resilience committees for managing crises.
Oh, right.
And for those big organizational projects,
Yeah.
he mentions these judgment calibration quizzes.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it helps teams understand their own biases when assessing risk.
Okay. So it's like almost like a quiz to figure out how well people understand risk.
Yeah, and he says when you interview managers and board members, it often reveals different levels of resilience within a company.
Right. So I guess some companies are just more prepared than others.
And a key insight is that organizations with more sophisticated practices treat past crises as learning experiences.
Okay.
So they refine their approach and they prioritize education.
Right. So they're constantly learning and adapting.
And he credits CROs with being key to this.
Okay.
Those chief risk officers.
Right.
And of course, you need the board's support for this to actually work.
So what are the hallmarks of these successful, resilient organizations that BSWAS talks about?
Well, he outlines 5 key traits.
Okay.
Foresight, being able to anticipate problems.
Okay.
Diverse and flexible structures. Breaking down those silos so information can flow.
Right.
Quick response mechanisms.
Okay.
And a culture of continuous learning.
Right. So learning from your mistakes and from others.
It all comes back to that proactive and integrated approach.
Right. It's not just having a plan. It's a whole strategy.
He really emphasizes that resilience is about being competitive and driving growth.
Okay.
It's not just a defensive thing.
Right. It's an opportunity, not a cost.
Exactly.
But I guess there can be this disconnect between ideals and reality.
Yeah, he points out that companies with less developed risk management might struggle to match the board's vision.
Okay.
Because boards are increasingly looking to risk management for strategic insight.
So they want to be able to anticipate future challenges and opportunities.
Exactly, and this
Right.
aligns with the whole evolution of ERM and IRM,
Okay.
which is about not just mitigating risks, but actually seizing opportunities.
Right. So risk managers need to go beyond compliance
Yeah,
and start offering solutions.
and empowering their teams.
So meeting those board expectations.
Yeah, and when that doesn't happen,
Right.
it suggests an immature risk culture.
Okay.
And he also notes that resilience often becomes a priority after a setback.
It's like you don't know what you're missing until
Until it hits you.
until it hits you. Right.
And he makes a distinction between operational resilience,
Okay.
which is reactive and focused on the past,
Uh-huh.
and strategic resilience,
Okay.
which is forward-looking and acknowledges uncertainty.
Okay. So resilience isn't one size fits all.
No, it's a journey.
Yeah.
It has to be tailored to your specific goals.
Right.
And not every company needs to be at the highest level,
Right.
especially given the resources it takes.
Right.
He even mentions the Cranfield report that suggests 5 levels of resilience maturity.
Right. So you don't have to go for the gold standard if you don't need to.
Exactly.
So what are the main purposes of these resilience initiatives?
Well, he says it's a form of stress testing.
Okay.
It shows the value of risk management,
Uh-huh.
and it helps unify those forward-looking metrics so
Okay.
you can be more prepared for the future.
Right. And he talks about how that gap between board expectations and reality
Yeah,
can actually drive change.
it can.
But he also warns that boards might not fully grasp the complexity of it all,
Yeah,
which can lead to a false sense of security.
it can.
So resilience initiatives can bridge that gap.
They can.
But he also cautions that organizations might have these really ambitious plans
Yeah.
that lack clear steps or aren't aligned with the actual risks.
Right.
So it's one thing to have a plan, but it's another to be able to actually put it into practice. And he points out these shortcomings in crisis management, like how information flows and how decisions are made under pressure and how teams often aren't well trained.
Yeah, it's not just about the plan, it's
Yeah.
about the people, too.
So let's get back to that link between ERM and resilience.
Okay.
Because Biswas really highlights how closely connected they are.
He does.
You know, he says that resilience integrates ERM and business continuity.
Yeah, echoing that ISO 222-316.
Right. And because ERM is all about managing uncertainty,
Yeah.
anything you do to manage those risks makes you more resilient.
Right, and he puts ERM at the center of that resilience universe.
Okay.
And he gives a few reasons for that.
Yeah.
ERM is proactive.
Okay.
It takes a company-wide view,
Right.
and it provides that framework for overseeing your controls.
Right. So true resilience is about both preventing crises
Yeah.
and being able to respond to them.
Exactly. You can't just rely on reacting.
Right. You need both.
It's about balancing people and processes.
So risk managers need to understand the difference between control and management.
Yeah.
And they need to educate the board
Uh-huh.
on the value of good risk management.
Yeah, and collaboration.
And it's an ongoing thing, right?
Yeah, because resilience is always evolving.
Okay, so final analysis. What does resilience really mean for organizations today?
Well, Biswas says it plays a lot of different roles,
Okay.
especially for organizations engaged in what he calls infinite games,
Okay.
those that are looking for long-term success.
Right.
And for those organizations, ERM becomes the way to integrate resilience.
Oh, okay.
And he also mentions that FIRMA survey, which found that executives now see risk management as including resilience,
Right.
and that it's part of long-term strategy in this unpredictable world.
So the key take.
What Pritesh Biswas calls organization disruptors.
Yeah.
So when Biswas is talking about a disruptor, he's basically talking about anything that I guess throws a wrench into the works, you know, like something that really shakes things up and interferes with how things normally go, whether it's like an event or a process, you know.
Yeah, definitely. Like those curveballs that come out of nowhere and just change the whole game.
Yeah, exactly. And what I think is really useful about Biswas's framework is how he kind of breaks it down into these two main types of disruptors. Like on the one hand, you've got those innovative disruptors, right?
Yeah.
So those are more like your groundbreaking technologies, those things that come in and completely revolutionize how markets work.
Yeah, like completely transform the landscape.
Yeah, exactly. And then on the other hand, you've got the negative disruptors, and those are more of those major global shocks, like a massive public health emergency or some huge geopolitical instability.
Right. The ones that kind of throw everything into chaos.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Those ones that have that that wide-reaching, negative impact across the board. And so what we're really hoping to do today, as we delve into these specific examples you've all sent in, is to really tease out those core risk management lessons that are embedded in these disruptors.
Yeah.
Like, how can we use these past disruptions as kind of a roadmap to help organizations build in greater resilience and really importantly, adaptability?
Yeah. It's like using history as a guide to prepare for the future.
Exactly. So consider this your crash course in understanding the significance of these events and what kind of legacy they've left behind.
Yeah. And I think the 4 key disruptors that BISWAS focuses on give us a really great starting point. I mean, they're all so different. They touch on such different parts of the world, and they all had such a huge impact.
Absolutely. So we'll be talking about the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on public health. Then we'll dive into the 2007-2008 financial crisis and what that did to the banking sector. Then we'll untangle the mess that was the Suez Canal blockage and how that affected the global supply chain.
Mm-hmm. Each one a real doozy in its own right.
Definitely. And then finally, we'll explore the ever-present and ever-changing influence of social media and how it's changed the way we communicate.
All right. Sounds like a plan. Let's kick things off with COVID, shall we? I mean, that one really hit us all hard.
Yeah, no kidding. So, I think it's safe to say that that the emergence of SARS-CoV-2 back in late 2019 really marked the start of a truly global upheaval.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And then when the World Health Organization officially named it COVID-19 in February 2020, well, it just spread like wildfire from there.
And I think what BISWAS really highlights and what we all kind of lived through in our own ways was just how differently it affected everyone and everything. Like, different countries were hit harder than others, different industries felt it more intensely, and even individual companies and people, they all experienced the repercussions in different ways and at different times.
Yeah, totally. It was global in scale, but those consequences, like you said, were very much localized and specific.
Exactly. And it really brought to light how interconnected everything is, how disruption in one area can have knock-on effects in seemingly unrelated sectors. It really highlighted the need for organizations to be thinking about risk assessment in a much more dynamic way, to be able to adapt quickly to these unforeseen interdependencies.
Absolutely. Now, to get a broader perspective on this, you also pointed us towards this 2021 OECD report called Strengthening Economic Resilience Following the COVID-19 Crisis, a firm and industry perspective. What were some of the key takeaways from that analysis?
Well, the OECD report really dug deep into those diverse impacts. They did a really thorough job of breaking down how different industries were affected, looking at all the different ways the pandemic rippled through the system. They found that some industries, like hospitality, for instance, were basically shut down immediately. I mean, it was a total standstill for many of them. While other industries, they saw massive shifts in consumer demand or that their established supply chains just got completely disrupted.
Right. And so beyond those immediate impacts, what other insights did the report offer?
Well, it also really emphasized how country-specific factors played a huge role in how well different economies were able to withstand that initial shock. Things like pre-existing social safety nets, the strength of their public health infrastructure, and how their governments responded, all those things made a massive difference in their overall resilience. And, really importantly, it also looked at how different population groups were disproportionately affected, highlighting all these key policy considerations around inequality and providing adequate social support.
Right. So it wasn't just about the biological impact of the virus itself, but also how it interacted with these pre-existing economic and social vulnerabilities.
Exactly. And the OECD took it a step further, too. They didn't just focus on the immediate crisis response. They emphasized that as countries started to come out of that acute phase of the pandemic, it was crucial not to lose sight of the other big long-term challenges facing the world. They saw the recovery period as this unique opportunity to rebuild stronger, of course, to create systems that could better withstand future shocks, but also to really leverage strategic policies and international cooperation to tackle these persistent issues like inequality, climate change, and the digital transformation of our economies and societies.
Yeah, a chance to really learn from the crisis and rebuild with those future challenges in mind. That makes a lot of sense. Now, bringing it back to BISWAS's risk management perspective, what specific observations did he make about how organizations responded to COVID-19?
Well, one of the most insightful things, I think, is how the pandemic forced organizations across all sectors to take a good hard look in the mirror, you know. They had to re-examine their core objectives, their long-term priorities. And this naturally led to them reassessing their risk management strategies.
Right, right, like a forced reset almost.
Yeah, exactly. And what's really interesting is that some organizations, especially those in the pharmaceutical industry, actually ended up expanding their risk appetite.
Really?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, they had to, right? They were facing this urgent global need to develop vaccines quickly. So they had to be willing to take on bigger risks to get things done.
Yeah, totally. It's like a classic example of how a crisis can actually drive risk-taking when the stakes are high enough and the potential benefits are huge.
Right. And the stakes don't get much higher than a global pandemic.
Definitely. So, what other key takeaways did Biswas highlight about organizational responses?
Well, he also pointed out how COVID led to these entirely new types of risks, especially when it comes to employee well-being. I mean, the massive shift to remote and hybrid work models, while great in a lot of ways in terms of flexibility, it also created all these new challenges around mental health, maintaining team cohesion when everyone's scattered, and ensuring everyone had equal access to resources and support, no matter where they were working from.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It wasn't just about the physical health risks of the virus, but also the mental and social well-being of employees.
Absolutely. And on a more technical level, the IT sector suddenly found themselves under immense pressure. With everyone working remotely, the number of potential entry points for hackers increased dramatically, putting a huge strain on their existing firewall security infrastructure. But as Biswas points out, the fact that most IT systems held up pretty well actually shows just how agile and resilient those IT teams are. They had to adapt incredibly quickly to this unprecedented situation, and for the most part, they did a remarkable job.
Yeah, a real testament to their flexibility and adaptability, for sure. Okay, let's shift gears now and dive into our second major disruptor, the 2007-2008 financial crisis.
Oh, yeah, that one was a doozy.
No kidding. The Chartered Finance Institute, they described it as a severe financial crisis that gripped the world from 2008 to 2009, and it's often called the Great Recession. It's hard to overstate just how huge of an impact it had globally. It affected so many people's lives and destabilized financial institutions around the world. And it's interesting because, like we were talking about with COVID, that loss of trust in institutions wasn't just a financial sector thing. When we look at the Suez Canal blockage later, we'll see another kind of trust being challenged, that trust in the seamlessness of global supply chains.
Yeah, for sure. And the thing is, this crisis, as both Biswas and the CFI point out, didn't just happen out of the blue. There were very specific underlying causes that led to it.
Right. It wasn't just some random act of fate. So can you walk us through those causes? What were the main factors that led to this financial meltdown?
Sure. So a big part of it was this huge housing market bubble, especially in the United States. And this was driven by the massive growth of these really complex financial instruments called mortgage-backed securities.
Mortgage-backed securities, those sound complicated. Can you break those down for us a bit?
Yeah, so essentially, these securities were bundled together from a bunch of individual mortgage loans, many of which were actually pretty risky, what they call subprime loans. The idea was that by bundling them together, you could spread the risk around. But the problem was, lending practices got really lax. So a lot of people who couldn't really afford to repay their mortgages were getting approved for these loans anyway.
Oh, wow. So it's like building a house of cards on a shaky foundation.
Yeah, exactly. And when the housing market inevitably cooled down, well, that whole house of cards came tumbling down.
So what happened when those mortgages started going bad?
Well, as more and more homeowners started defaulting on their payments, the value of those mortgage-backed securities just plummeted. This caused massive losses for the financial institutions that were holding these securities. And it led to some pretty catastrophic consequences. We saw major players in the financial industry either getting bought off in these fire sales, or in some cases, like with Lehman Brothers in the US and the Royal Bank of Scotland in the UK, they needed massive government bailouts to avoid a total collapse of the financial system.
Yikes. And of course, the people who held those subprime mortgages, they were hit the hardest, facing foreclosure and losing their homes. It's easy to get lost in the financial jargon, but we can't forget about the real human cost of these disruptions.
Absolutely. The impact on people's lives was devastating.
So looking at this through Biswas's lens, what were the big risk management lessons we learned from this crisis?
Well, one of the most significant things was this huge breakdown of trust. Bank regulators, the people who were supposed to be overseeing the stability of the financial system, they lost a lot of trust in the very institutions they were supposed to be regulating. And this loss of confidence created a massive reputational risk, not just for the banks themselves, but also for the regulatory bodies that were seen as failing in their oversight role. And it wasn't just about the regulators failing to catch the problems early on. It was also about the failure of those complex models that the banks were using.
Right. The models that were supposed to be predicting and managing the risks?
Exactly. Everyone assumed these sophisticated models could handle everything. But the crisis showed just how limited they really were, especially when the assumptions they were based on turned out to be wrong.
So they were like a false sense of security almost.
Yeah, pretty much. They became a crutch instead of a tool for genuine understanding. And so after the crisis, regulators around the world really changed their approach. They started requiring bankers and everyone involved to have a much deeper understanding of these complex models, including the data that went into them, how they worked, and their limitations.
Like a much more hands-on critical approach.
Yeah, exactly. They couldn't just blindly trust the models anymore. They had to know what was going on under the hood. And we also saw a big increase in focus on what's called conduct risk in the banking sector.
Conduct risk, what's that all about?
So it's basically about ensuring that customers are treated fairly, making sure banks aren't pushing unsuitable products on people, and generally promoting market stability by preventing actions that could threaten the entire financial system. You know, like if someone goes into a bank and explicitly says they want a safe, low-return investment, the bank shouldn't be trying to push them into some high-risk scheme just to make a bigger commission. That's the kind of thing conduct risk is trying to prevent. And on top of all that, Biswas points out that boards of directors at financial institutions started paying a lot more attention to building a strong, ethical organizational culture and making their institutions more resilient to future shocks.
So a real shift towards greater transparency, accountability, and a more human-centered approach to finance.
Yeah, exactly. A recognition that people matter, not just profits.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on now to a very different kind of disruptor. The Suez Canal blockage.
Ah, yes,
Oh.
the Ever Given. That was a sight to see.
No kidding. This massive container ship gets stuck in the Suez Canal for 6 days, and the whole world is watching. It's almost hard to believe, right? This giant vessel, 400 meters long, longer than the Eiffel Tower, carrying almost 18,000 shipping containers, weighing a whopping 220,000 tons, just wedged in there, bringing global trade to a screeching halt.
Yeah, and I think it really drove home the point about the fragility of these global systems we rely on. It showed that even something as seemingly simple as a ship getting stuck can have massive ripple effects across the entire world.
It's crazy to think about. What was the immediate impact of this blockage?
Well, it basically brought all traffic through the canal to a complete standstill. This created a huge backlog of ships waiting to pass through, over 400 of them, and it's estimated that about $10 billion worth of trade was sold each day. That's $10 billion a day just because of one stuck ship.
Wow. It really puts the scale of the disruption into perspective.
Yeah, it was a major wake-up call for the shipping industry. They started to realize the risks involved in relying on these supersized ships to navigate these narrow, critical waterways.
So, what were the main risk management takeaways Biswas highlighted from this event?
Well, one of the biggest things was how it exposed the vulnerability of the just-in-time inventory approach.
Just-in-time inventory. Can you explain that a bit?
Sure. It's basically a system where companies try to keep their inventory levels as low as possible, only ordering what they need right when they need it. It's meant to be super efficient, but as the Suez Canal blockage showed, it can be very fragile. Even a short delay can throw everything off and lead to shortages and disruptions.
So it's a trade-off between efficiency and resilience, right?
Exactly. And the Suez Canal blockage made a lot of companies start thinking about building more redundancy into their supply chains, maybe sourcing things from multiple locations instead of relying on a single source.
Yeah, spreading the risk a bit more.
Exactly. And the blockage also highlighted the issue of concentration risk. A lot of companies were sourcing crucial components from a very limited number of suppliers, often all in the same region. So when this one choke point in the global shipping network got blocked, they had no backup plan. They were stuck.
And on top of that, it sounds like a lot of companies didn't have any real contingency plans in place.
Yeah, a lot of them realized that they weren't very agile when it came to finding alternative solutions. They couldn't adapt quickly enough to get their goods to their customers.
It's a good reminder that efficiency can't come at the expense of adaptability. You've got to be able to roll with the punches sometimes. Okay, let's move on to our final disruptor. Social media. This one's interesting because it's less of a sudden event and more of this ongoing, ever-evolving force.
Yeah, it's definitely a different kind of disruptor, but it's had a massive impact on how we live and work. I mean, think about it. By January 2022, there were already something like 4.2 billion active social media users globally.
Wow, that's like half the planet's population.
Exactly. And for a lot of people, it's become their main source of news. Bezos mentions that, depending on the country, it's somewhere between 35% and 70% of people getting their news from social media.
That's a huge amount of influence.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing. And with that kind of reach, it's not surprising that it's come with a whole host of risks and challenges.
So, what are some of the main risks associated with social media?
Well, Biswas talks about cyberbullying, which has become a huge problem. There's also the risk of privacy breaches and identity theft, the exposure of children to inappropriate content, and the ways predators can use these platforms to target vulnerable users.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword for sure. On the one hand, it connects people and allows for information sharing in ways we never thought possible. But on the other hand, it creates all these new dangers for individuals and organizations.
Absolutely. It's a constant balancing act, trying to harness the benefits while mitigating the risks.
So, what were some of Biswas's key risk management observations in the context of social media?
Well, one thing he noted was how quickly traditional media organizations adapted to this new landscape. They saw the potential of social media to reach a massive audience instantly. And those who were able to leverage that shift effectively, they managed to stay relevant and even grow their reach.
It's like they had to evolve or die.
Pretty much. But Biswas also points out the huge challenges posed by fake news and algorithmic bias on social media. The way these platforms' algorithms work can actually end up amplifying misinformation and creating these echo chambers where people only see information that confirms their existing beliefs.
Yeah, and that makes it really hard for people to find unbiased, reliable information to base their decisions on. The information landscape has become so complex and overwhelming.
Yeah, it's a real problem. And then there's the whole issue of data security. With all this personal information being shared online, it's created a massive vulnerability. We've seen so many examples of unauthorized access to data, and it highlights the critical need for organizations to have really strong cybersecurity systems in place.
Right. It's not just about the content that's shared on social media, but also about protecting the platforms themselves and all the sensitive data they hold. So it's a lot to think about. Now, before we wrap things up, Biswas also touches on the challenge of predicting future disruptors.
Yeah, he makes the point that it's really hard to know for sure what the next big global shock is going to be.
Right, like trying to predict the future.
Exactly. But he does offer some helpful ways of thinking about it, like considering different categories of risk. He talks about unknown unknowns, which are those completely unexpected surprises, and unknown knowns, which are risks that we might be aware of but tend to ignore or downplay. He also emphasizes the importance of horizon scanning, which is about proactively looking for emerging trends and weak signals that could point to future disruptions.
So trying to develop a more forward-thinking, anticipatory mindset.
Yeah, exactly. And to illustrate this, he mentions the European Parliament's Future Shocks Report, which identifies a bunch of key risks that Europe might face by 2030.
Like what kind of risks?
Well, everything from energy price volatility and extreme weather events caused by climate change to social divisions, migration challenges, and geopolitical instability involving countries like Russia and China. They also flagged economic concerns like public debt, potential semiconductor shortages, and the possibility of a shaky economic recovery.
Wow, that's a pretty daunting list of potential challenges.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in. And Biswas also provides a bunch of resources for anyone who wants to delve deeper into these potential future disruptors, looking at everything from global risks and compliance issues to security threats and
Risk management as like separate things, you know? Like they're not just different departments or initiatives, they're actually deeply connected. They're both key parts of building a truly resilient organization. It's not just about defining them, right? It's about figuring out those practical steps.
Right.
Like how to anticipate problems before they happen, and then just as importantly, how to adapt and pivot when those problems actually hit.
Okay, so let's jump right in. This piece he sent over makes a really useful distinction right off the bat. It talks about resilience as those proactive steps.
Mm-hmm.
So the things you do to prevent bad stuff from happening in the first place, like putting those control measures in place.
Right.
And then agility, well, That's all about the fast recovery, how you bounce back quickly after something goes wrong.
Makes sense.
It's kind of like, imagine building a strong foundation for a house.
Okay.
That's resilience.
Yeah.
But then also having the skills to rebuild quickly after, say, an earthquake hits.
Right, right. I like that. It's a good way to think about it. Like one's your defense and the other is how you recover.
Exactly. And this actually leads us to a really, really interesting part of the material. They use this analogy of 4 different managers
Oh, yeah.
and how they each handle a sudden shock.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a great way to bring these concepts to life.
It is.
So first up, we have Agile Annie.
Yes.
And she's the one who's always thinking ahead.
Right.
She's got all these safeguards in place. She runs simulations. She's doing all she can to make sure her team isn't caught off guard.
Repaired.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
She's not just hoping for the best. She's actively preparing and practicing.
Right.
So when something does happen, it's not a total disaster.
That's smart.
So the takeaway here, I think, is it's not enough just to have plans.
Yeah, no.
It's about building that proactive mindset into the whole organization.
I agree. You got to practice too.
Yeah.
Actually rehearse those responses.
Yeah, exactly. Like turn those potential disasters into something you can actually handle.
Exactly. And you know what's key about Annie? She gets that even the best defenses, they're not foolproof. Something's going to happen eventually, right? So she's focused on 2 things. Minimizing the initial damage and then making sure they can get back to normal quickly.
That's the agility part.
Right. It all comes from that preparation.
Makes sense.
Oh.
Okay, now let's talk about firefighting Freddy.
Oh, Freddie, yeah.
He's interesting because he also, invests in prevention,
Mm-hmm.
which you'd think would put him in a good spot.
Uh-huh.
But when a shock hits, he's all about that immediate action.
Yeah.
Lots of energy, putting out fires.
All over the place.
Yeah, but it's kind of chaotic,
Yeah.
There's no clear plan for the long term. It's like he's constantly putting out those small fires,
Right.
but he's not really fixing the underlying problem.
Yeah, he's not learning from those fires. You know what I mean?
Right.
He's not taking the time to build stronger systems.
So he's got the agility, like the quick response,
Yeah.
but that lack of a solid plan.
Not good. It's going to hurt him in the long run.
Yeah.
Especially if those crises keep happening, It's exhausting and it's just not as effective.
Okay, then we've got procrastinating Polly.
Oh, Polly.
She's a whole other story.
Yeah.
When something happens, she basically freezes.
Oh, no.
Forms committees, wants more data.
Analysis paralysis.
Exactly. And those things could be helpful eventually.
Right.
But the timing's all wrong.
Yeah, timing is everything.
While she's still analyzing, her company's performance is tanking.
Ooh.
So it really shows how delaying action, even taking no action at all, can be just as bad.
It's a good point. You need to be able to act quickly, decisively, even if you don't have all the information yet.
And that's agility, right? Being able to act when it matters.
Exactly. Having the best analysis in the world doesn't help if it comes too late.
Right. Okay, and finally, there's tumbling Tommy.
Tommy, what's he up to?
He basically just waits for someone else to solve the problem.
Oh, no.
Like he's hoping for government help or some external fix.
Not a good strategy.
It's not. And the article points out that even with those huge events, think about the COVID-19 crisis back in 2020, the companies that did well, they were the ones who adapted, right?
Absolutely.
They found new ways to operate. Tommy, he's just sitting there totally exposed.
Yeah, you can't outsource your resilience, You can't just wait for someone else to save you. You got to build that capacity to respond and adapt yourself.
And that was a huge wake-up call for a lot of organizations, right?
Right.
Like how essential it is to be able to pivot
It was.
when the usual ways of doing things just aren't working anymore.
Yeah.
So the message from these 4 is pretty clear. Be more like Annie.
Right. Be prepared. Be proactive.
Plan ahead and be able to adapt quickly.
Those are the keys.
But the article doesn't stop there. It gives us another scenario, this time focusing on a supply chain crisis.
Okay, yeah.
It's a different kind of disruption,
Right.
but it shows how those same principles, like agility and resilience, apply in all kinds of situations.
Different context, same principles. Love it. What do they call this one?
The 4 managers and the supply chain crisis.
Okay, yeah. That one's good too. It's all about how those different leadership styles play out when something disrupts your supply chain, which is like the heart of a lot of businesses.
Yeah. So in this scenario, we start with prepared Priya.
Priya. All right, let's see what she does.
Well, she's kind of like the Annie of the supply chain world, right?
Right.
She's already diversified her suppliers. She's got backup plans in place. So when the crisis hits, she just smoothly switches to her alternatives, adjusts her operations, and keeps supporting her clients.
Wow. No hiccups at all.
Seems like it. She basically turns a crisis into an opportunity.
That's impressive. So it's not just about reacting, right? It's about
Right.
building that resilience in beforehand.
Exactly. Having those contingency plans in place.
You got to be thinking ahead.
Okay, now we've got Rushing Ravi.
Bravi. Okay.
He's kind of the Freddy of this scenario.
Ah, got it. So lots of action.
Tons. He's frantically searching for new suppliers, redirecting resources. He's moving fast.
Yeah. Okay, at least he's doing something.
Yeah, his business doesn't totally collapse, which is good,
Right.
but it's messy.
Ah, I see.
It's confusing for everyone, and in the end, it costs him way more than it should have.
Yeah, that's the problem with just reacting, right?
Hmm.
You can move fast, but without a clear strategy, you end up wasting a lot of energy and resources.
And money.
Hmm.
Okay, then there's Cautious Clara.
Okay, Clara, let's hear about her approach.
She's very thorough. Like, she takes her time, holds tons of meetings, wants to analyze every single option before making a move.
Okay, but
But there's a but. By the time she finally makes a decision, her competitors have already adapted.
Uh-oh.
She's lost valuable time.
So being too cautious can backfire.
It can. Sometimes being too slow or too afraid to make a decision can be just as bad as making the wrong decision.
Interesting. So it's about finding that balance
Yeah,
between being thorough and being able to act decisively. Sometimes you have to make a call even if you don't have all the information.
especially in a crisis. Okay, and last but not least, we have Idle Ian.
Idle Ian. Okay, I'm a little worried about this one already.
He's the Tommy of the supply chain world.
Yeah.
Basically, he sees the crisis as something external, something he can't control,
Oh, no. Here we go again.
so he just waits.
Passively. Just hoping it'll go away on its own.
Pretty much. And unsurprisingly, his production stops, customers go elsewhere, his business is in big trouble.
Yeah, no surprise there. You can't just sit back and wait for things to get better. You have to take ownership, take action.
Again, it all comes back to taking charge. You can't rely on someone else to save you.
Exactly. Resilience and agility, they have to come from within.
So the big lesson here is be prepared, be adaptable, be like Priya.
Priya, yeah.
She's the one who thrives in this situation.
Makes sense.
It really highlights how, anticipating problems and acting decisively, it's not just about surviving. It can actually give you a real edge when everyone else is struggling.
I like these manager analogies. They're great.
They're super helpful, right?
Yeah, they make these kind of abstract ideas feel a lot more real and understandable.
Totally. And they lead us nicely into the next part of the material,
Okay.
which is all about business continuity management.
Ah, yes. PCM. That's the more formal framework, right?
It is. And the article specifically references the ISO 22301.201 teen standard.
Good one. It's a great resource for putting all these principles into practice, like what Annie and Priya are doing, but in a more structured way.
Exactly. So business continuity, the article defined it, basically as an organization's ability to keep delivering its products and services, at an acceptable level, even after something disruptive happens.
Makes sense.
And it talks about having strategies for before, during, and after an event.
Got to cover all the bases.
Yeah. And it breaks it all down into these three key phases.
Okay.
Planning and preparation, reacting to the crisis, and then restoring normal operations.
Logical.
So let's start with planning and preparation.
Right.
That seems like the most important part.
It is. It's where you build that foundation of resilience.
Right. And the article, it really stresses understanding your organization's unique context.
Right.
Like its culture, how aware everyone is
Yeah.
of these ideas about resilience.
It mentions specific sections of ISO 22301 here, right?
It does, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Sections 4 and 5.
Yeah.
And the point is, a one-size-fits-all approach, it's not going to work.
No, definitely not. Every organization is different.
You have to adapt it to your specific culture and, how your people think about resilience.
Because if you don't have that awareness, that buy-in from the team.
It's not going to work.
Exact.
Okay, so part of this planning process also involves, actually identifying potential problems.
Yeah, you got to know what you're up against.
And that's where risk assessment tools come in
Right.
to help figure out those risks that could really disrupt things.
It's about being proactive, right? Not just waiting for something bad to happen.
Exactly. And then there's the business impact analysis.
BIA.
Yeah,
Important stuff.
it is. And the article really makes a point of saying, this is different from just a regular risk assessment.
Oh, how so?
Well, a risk assessment, that tells you what might happen.
Right.
But the BIA, it tells you what the impact will be if those things actually do happen.
Ah, okay. So it helps you prioritize.
Exactly.
Like, what are the things that'll really hurt us if they go wrong?
So the BIA is all about understanding those consequences.
Okay.
It's not just listing the risks, it's figuring out which parts of the organization are absolutely essential.
Yeah. Makes sense. Those critical activities.
Yeah. And then what would the impact be if they were disrupted?
You need to know how bad it would be
And it also helps you figure out what resources you'd need to recover.
so you can be ready.
Exactly.
There's a specific section in ISO 22301 about that, right? The difference between risk assessment and the BIA.
Yeah, it's section 8.2. It really clarifies that distinction. Okay, so once you've assessed those risks and you understand the potential impact, then you can start thinking about like prevention and mitigation strategies.
Right.
And that's where you develop your specific business continuity strategies.
Okay. And the article makes a good point here. It says you shouldn't just assume that disruptions are inevitable. Like
Right.
sometimes you can actually prevent them altogether.
Or at least minimize the damage.
Right. And there's another section in ISO 22301 that talks about this, right?
Yeah, section 8.3. It's all about choosing the right strategies and making sure you have the resources to implement them.
Smart.
Okay, so you've done all that. Now you're ready to move on to the actual prepare phase.
The actual plan.
Yeah. This is where you create those detailed plans, the step-by-step guides for what to do when something happens.
Like a playbook.
Exactly. And this is where the article really emphasizes testing those plans.
Oh, yeah. That's critical. You got to make sure it actually works.
Yeah. Section 8.5 of ISO 22301 is all about this.
Makes sense. So what kind of testing do they recommend?
Well, they outline a bunch of different methods.
Okay.
It can be simple stuff like checklists.
Right. Just making sure you've got everything covered in the plan.
Yeah. And then there are structured walkthroughs where you basically simulate the execution of a plan step by step.
Okay. So like a dry run.
Yeah. And then there's scenario planning where you role play responses to specific situations.
Like, what if this happens? What do we do?
Exactly. And then it gets even more intense.
Oh.
You've got parallel exercises where you actually activate those recovery processes,
Wow.
but without fully shutting down normal operations.
Okay.
And then the most intense of all, the full interruption test.
Oh, wow. The big one.
Yeah, where you basically simulate a complete shutdown of your man operations.
That's a serious test.
It is.
This?
But, it's like practicing a fire drill. It might be inconvenient, but it could save your business.
I've seen those tests uncover some major weaknesses,
Mhm.
things you'd never think of just reading the plan.
And you definitely don't want to find out your plan has flaws when you're actually in a crisis.
Nope. Better to find out beforehand.
The article also talks about auditing those plans,
Right.
making sure they're still relevant. That's section 9 of ISO 223.001.
Okay.
And then this idea of continuous improvement.
Always going to be improving.
Yeah, that's section 10. Basically, your plan, it's not a static document.
Right.
Things change, your business evolves, you have to adapt your plan along the way.
That's so important. The world's not standing still, so your plans can't either.
Exactly. So that's the whole planning and preparation phase.
Okay, sounds pretty thorough. What's next?
Next up is reaction to crisis.
All right. The moment of truth.
Right. And the article, it actually defines what a disruption is, according to ISO 22301.
Okay, what's their definition?
So they say it's an incident, whether expected or unexpected, that results in an unplanned adverse shift from the anticipated delivery of products and services.
Wordy, but I get it. It's basically anything that throws a wrench in your plans.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they also make a really good point about how crises can unfold at different speeds.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Like sometimes it's sudden and immediate,
Right.
like a system outage, for example.
Okay.
But other times, it's more of a slow burn.
Like a recession, maybe?
Yeah, or a pandemic or something like that.
Makes a big difference in how you respond.
It's huge. Like if it's sudden, you need to react immediately.
Follow the plan quickly.
But if it's a slow burn, you might need to monitor the situation, adjust your plans as things develop.
Stay more flexible.
Exactly. Okay, and then the final phase is restoration.
Back to normal.
Well, kind of. It's about getting back to those normal operations, restoring your service quality. But the article, it raises some really important questions here.
Really? Like what?
Well, like, should you even aim to go back to exactly how things were before?
Interesting.
Yeah. Has the crisis maybe revealed some underlying weaknesses that you need to fix?
Ah, okay. So it's a chance to learn and improve.
Exactly. And there are a bunch of other questions too, like what were the key lessons? Do you need new control measures? How well did your plan actually work? What did the whole experience tell you about your organizational culture?
Big picture stuff.
Yeah. And did you meet leadership's expectations for resilience?
That's a good one.
It's a lot to think about.
It is, but it's important.
It is. Because restoration, it's not just about going back to how things were.
Right.
It's about using that experience to improve,
To come out stronger and more resilient, like a crisis can be a good thing, in a way.
if you learn from it. Okay, so we've talked a lot about, protecting the organization, surviving disruptions.
Mm-hmm.
But then the article throws in this really interesting twist.
Oh, what's that?
It talks about the relationship between risk management and innovation.
Ooh, that's an interesting one. I wouldn't have necessarily put those two together.
Yeah, you might think they're kind of opposites. Right?
Yeah, like risk management is all about being cautious,
Right.
minimizing threats, playing it safe.
And innovation is all about, like, pushing boundaries, trying new things.
Exactly. But the article says they can actually work together.
They can. It argues that good risk management can actually encourage innovation.
Really? How so?
Well, by identifying those strategic vulnerabilities,
Okay.
like maybe you're relying too much on one product or one market,
Whoa, okay.
that awareness can actually push you to come up with creative solutions, to diversify, to become more resilient.
Makes sense. Like if you know you've got a weakness, you're more likely to try to find ways to fix it.
Exactly. And the article also talks about how important it is to have like a defined tolerance for risk.
What does that mean?
It means being okay with some experiments failing.
Ah, okay.
Because if you punish people too harshly for trying something new and it not working out.
They're not going to try anything new.
Exactly. But if you create an environment where it's safe to take calculated risks.
Then you get more creativity, more innovation, because people aren't so afraid to fail.
And the article also argues that a strong risk management framework can actually help accelerate innovation.
Interesting. I wouldn't have thought so.
Yeah, because it gives you that solid control environment.
Okay.
So you can take calculated risks, you can be bolder because you know you've got those safeguards in place.
Like guardrails.
Yeah, exactly. It gives you the freedom to experiment without being reckless. And then finally, the article touches on the importance of organizational culture.
Ah, culture. Always a big one.
It is, and it says that in a culture of blame where mistakes are punished, people are going to avoid taking any risks.
Right.
And that stifles innovation.
It does. But in a culture where it's okay to take risks, to learn from mistakes.
That's where innovation thrives.
Right. And risk management can actually help build that kind of culture.
Yeah, because it gives you that structure and clarity around risk-taking. So it's not just about being reckless, it's about being smart about it.
I like that. It all ties together.
It does.
Yeah.
So to sum it all up, agility and proactive risk management, they're not just separate things.
No.
They're interconnected.
Key parts of a resilient organization.
Exactly. And those stories of the four managers, they really illustrate those different approaches.
Yeah, they're great examples.
In business continuity management, using those standards like ISO 22301, it gives you that structured way to plan, to react, to recover.
Right. And that connection between risk management and innovation.
Yeah.
That's key. It's
Yeah.
not just about avoiding downsides. It's about using risk management to actually drive progress.
And for those along the way,
Sounds like a plan. Let's unravel those insights.
we'll be exploring some really fascinating territory from scenario analysis, and get this, its origins might surprise you, to horizon scanning, which is so much more than just predicting the future.
Oh, I'm intrigued already. Scenario analysis with a twist, huh?
You bet. We'll also delve into stress testing, which, believe it or not, isn't just for big banks anymore. And then finally, we'll take a peek at viability statements. They're like a window into how companies think about their long-term survival.
So it's not just about surviving a crisis, it's about thriving beyond it. I like that angle.
Exactly. Ready to unpack all of this.
Absolutely. Let's jump right in.
Okay, let's start with scenario analysis. The article really sets the stage, describing it as this crucial tool for organizations to prepare for potential future events and reduce that feeling of uncertainty. But it's not a quick fix, that's for sure. It requires real investment. People, time, money, and maybe even more importantly, a good dose of creativity. But here's the kicker, and this is where it gets really interesting. Scenario analysis actually has its roots in, wait for it, World War II.
World War II, that's fascinating. So, from battlefields to boardrooms, tell me more.
Right. It's a bit of a mind bender, isn't it? But when you think about the sheer complexity of planning for war, all those moving parts, all those potential outcomes, it kind of makes sense.
I see where you're going with this. So back then, it was a way for military strategists to game out different possibilities.
Precisely. To map out those potential futures, really understand the key factors at play, and explore those strategic choices, all before facing those situations on the battlefield. Talk about proactive thinking in a high-stakes environment.
Absolutely. And that foresight, that ability to anticipate, seems more relevant than ever today.
Right. And this military approach didn't stay confined to the battlefield for long. It made its way into the business world, and Shell Oil Company was really a pioneer in adapting it.
Shell oil, what were they using it for?
Well, think about the oil market. It's notoriously volatile, with those unpredictable swings in prices.
Makes sense. They probably needed a way to navigate that uncertainty.
Exactly. They used scenario analysis to grapple with those oil price fluctuations and figure out where to invest their resources for the long term.
Smart move, given their global reach and the sheer scale of their operations.
The key takeaway here is that what was initially a tool for wartime strategy became absolutely critical for navigating uncertainty in a sector as seemingly mundane as oil. It challenges us to think outside the box, to recognize that solutions might come from unexpected places.
I like that. It's about cross-pollination of ideas, borrowing from different fields.
And the beauty of scenario analysis is its adaptability. It's not just for oil giants. The article highlights how it's being used in urban planning, helping cities prepare for things like rapid population growth, or in engineering, to design structures that can withstand a whole range of conditions. It's even being applied in scientific research to anticipate different experimental results.
So it's like a universal tool for navigating a world of possibilities.
And get this, even political campaigns are using it. They use it to model different strategies and see how those might play out in elections.
That's interesting. So from predicting oil prices to predicting voter behavior, quite a range.
Right. It really highlights how relevant this method is, how it's constantly evolving and being applied in new and innovative ways.
So how does it actually work in practice?
Well, the article breaks it down into a few core steps. First, you have to take a hard look at the uncertainties out there, the what-ifs. Then it's all about understanding your own internal strengths and weaknesses. And then you need to figure out those external factors, the opportunities and threats that the world might throw your way.
So it is a combination of introspection and looking outward.
Precisely. But here's the crucial part. Scenario analysis isn't about predicting one specific future. It's about painting a picture of several possible futures, and then figuring out how you might navigate each one.
So instead of putting all your eggs in one basket, you're acknowledging that multiple outcomes are possible.
Exactly. By acknowledging that multiple futures are plausible, organizations can develop strategies that are more adaptable. And they can think about not just one path to success, but several different ones.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about broadening your perspective, considering different paths, not just the one you're currently on.
Now, when it comes to actually developing these scenarios, there are some key ingredients to keep in mind. First up, defining the uncertainties. This means asking the right questions, the ones that will truly shape what those different futures could look like.
Sounds simple enough, but I imagine it's trickier than it sounds.
You're absolutely right. One of the biggest challenges is not getting stuck in the past, not letting our past experiences limit our vision of what the future might hold.
We tend to project forward based on what we know, on what we've already experienced.
Exactly. And that's where things can get tricky. So we need to challenge our assumptions, ask ourselves, what if these assumptions are wrong? And we need to bring in different perspectives, play devil's advocate to make sure we're not missing any blind spots.
So it's about actively seeking out those alternative viewpoints, challenging those deeply held beliefs.
Exactly. Because sometimes those truly disruptive events, the ones that really shake things up, they come from those unexpected directions. And that's when those diverse perspectives become invaluable.
I see what you mean. It's about being prepared for the unexpected.
Then comes the question of how many scenarios you actually need to develop. The article suggests a best-case scenario, a worst-case scenario, and then maybe one or two in between that represent more moderate outcomes.
So a range of possibilities, from rosy to, well, not so rosy.
Right, but even that worst-case scenario has value. It's not just about being pessimistic. It's about really understanding your vulnerabilities, what you need to protect against.
So it helps identify those potential weak points.
Exactly. Having that best case scenario gives you something to aim for, to strive towards. That worst case helps you identify those vulnerabilities and figure out how to mitigate them, and those moderate scenarios. Well, they give you a more nuanced understanding of the more likely possibilities.
So each scenario serves a purpose. Each one provides a different lens through which to examine your strategy.
Once you have your scenarios laid out, the next step is to think about how likely each one is and what the potential risks associated with each are. It's about weighing things up, realizing that even those events that seem unlikely might need serious consideration if they could have a significant impact.
So it's not just about what might happen, but what the consequences of it happening could be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not just about probability, it's about the combination of that probability and the potential severity of the impact.
So a low probability event with a high potential impact might warrant more attention than a high probability event with a low impact.
Precisely. And finally, the most crucial step, actually using these insights to make decisions. The article gives a great example of a company that used scenario analysis when they were expanding their operations. Thinking through different scenarios led them to choose fewer locations but invest more in security at each location, which ultimately made them both more profitable and more resilient.
So a tangible example of how scenario analysis can translate into real-world actions and lead to better outcomes.
Right. It's not just an abstract exercise. It's about making more informed decisions in the present by carefully considering a range of potential futures and their implications.
So it's about being proactive, not reactive.
Absolutely. The article then neatly sums up the benefits of scenario analysis. It pushes you to think bigger, more strategically. It helps to break down groupthink by ensuring that diverse perspectives are heard. And it challenges us to question those ingrained assumptions, those biases that can sometimes lead us astray. But perhaps most importantly, it enhances our preparedness for those extreme, unexpected events.
So it helps organizations to be more adaptable and resilient. And that brings us back to our main topic.
Exactly. All of these benefits contribute to building a more resilient organization. An organization that can not only withstand challenges, but can adapt and even thrive in a constantly changing world. Now, with scenario analysis under our belt, let's move on to another crucial piece of the organizational resilience puzzle: horizon scanning.
Horizon scanning. Sounds intriguing.
It is. The article starts by posing a really thought-provoking question. It asks why so many organizations seem to be caught off guard by major global disruptions. Think about the financial crisis of 2007-2008, the COVID-19 pandemic, or the impact of the war in Ukraine on global supply chains. These events had a significant impact, yet many organizations were seemingly unprepared.
Those were definitely seismic shifts. So is horizon scanning a way to avoid those kinds of blind spots in the future?
That's exactly it. It's about being more proactive, more systematic in how we approach uncertainty. The article defines horizon scanning as a structured process for identifying potential uncertainties early on so that organizations can be better prepared to seize opportunities and mitigate threats.
It's about anticipating what might happen, not necessarily predicting what will happen.
Precisely. It's not about having a crystal ball, but about becoming more attuned to those subtle signals of change that are emerging all around us. And one of the frameworks that can be helpful in this process is the 3 horizons model.
3 horizons model. I'm not familiar with that. Can you break it down for me?
Of course. Imagine looking out at the horizon, but instead of 1, you see 3. The first horizon, Horizon 1, is all about the present. It's about those immediate actions and current challenges that an organization is dealing with today, those day-to-day operations.
Okay, so that's the here and now. What about the other 2 horizons?
Well, Horizon 2 looks a bit further out. It's about those trends that are already visible, those things that are likely to require strategic consideration in the short to medium term. So things that are on the horizon, not quite here yet, but approaching.
Like those storm clouds gathering in the distance.
A great analogy. And finally, you have Horizon 3, which is focused on those emerging uncertainties and long-term trends that might not be fully understood yet, but have the potential to significantly impact things down the line. This is where you need to be more proactive, more exploratory in your planning.
So each horizon represents a different time frame and requires a different approach.
Exactly. What are some of the specific benefits of using this layered approach? Well, the article mentions quite a few. It helps organizations to deepen their understanding of the forces that might shape future policy and strategy. It can highlight knowledge gaps, prompting further research.
So it's not just about what you know, but also about recognizing what you don't know.
Exactly. And it can help build consensus among different stakeholders about the challenges ahead and potential solutions. It can clarify those tough policy choices and trade-offs that are often unavoidable. And ultimately, it strengthens strategic resilience, making strategies more adaptable to changing circumstances.
It's about being prepared for whatever the future might hold.
Now, the article lays out a 6-step process for actually doing horizon scanning within an organization. First, you need to identify the key stakeholders, making sure you have a diverse range of perspectives involved. Then you need to clearly define the purpose, objectives, and expected outcomes of the horizon scanning activity. And then you actually conduct the research, often by assigning specific topics to different team members.
So it's a collaborative effort involving different people with different areas of expertise.
Exactly. Then it's about regularly gathering and reviewing the findings, making sure you're staying on top of things. After that, you move into the synthesis and validation stage, where you compile all those insights, present them to the stakeholders, and try to reach a shared understanding of what they mean. And finally, and this is crucial, you need to continuously monitor and review the key risks, reassessing your priorities as things evolve.
So it's an ongoing process, not just a one-time exercise.
Precisely. The article does point out some potential pitfalls. You don't want to get bogged down in trying to predict too far into the future or rely too heavily on current trends continuing unchanged.
So it's about finding that balance between anticipating the future and getting lost in speculation.
Exactly. And another key point is that horizon scanning isn't just a standalone activity. It needs to be integrated with an organization's overall risk management framework. The article discusses using the 3 lines of defense model to achieve this integration.
3 lines of defense, that sounds familiar. Can you refresh my memory on that?
Sure. It's a commonly used framework in risk management. The first line is made up of those frontline operations, the people who are directly involved in creating and delivering products or services.
So they're the ones on the ground dealing with the day-to-day realities.
Exactly. And when you integrate horizon scanning at this level, it helps these teams understand the potential impact of emerging risks on their operations. The second line is typically the risk management function, which looks at risk from a broader organizational perspective and tries to identify any gaps in controls. So horizon scanning at this level informs those comprehensive risk assessments. And finally, you have the third line, which is internal audit. They provide an independent assessment of the effectiveness of the organization's overall control environment.
So they're like the watchdogs, making sure everything is running smoothly.
Precisely. And they can use the insights from horizon scanning to evaluate whether the organization is truly prepared for the challenges that lie ahead.
It's like a system of checks and balances, ensuring that the organization is thinking about risk from multiple angles.
Exactly. And it creates that feedback loop, where those potential future challenges identified through horizon scanning directly inform and strengthen those risk management activities across the entire organization. Now, having explored ways to anticipate the future, let's shift gears and talk about stress testing. The article starts off with a simple, almost physical definition, suggesting that stress testing is about evaluating how much pressure an organization can withstand before it breaks.
Almost like testing the tensile strength of a material.
Yeah, exactly. And in practical terms, stress testing involves putting the organization through various realistic but extreme risk scenarios, really pushing it to see where its breaking points might be.
So it's about identifying those vulnerabilities before they become a real problem.
Right. And this helps the organization to define its risk tolerance, how much risk it can handle, and then put those preventive measures in place to avoid actually failing under pressure.
A bit like a fire drill, but for potential organizational crises.
The article then dives into the crucial role that stress testing plays in the banking industry. Regulators actually mandate stress tests to ensure banks are resilient enough to weather severe economic downturns. We see this with CTR and DFAST in the US, the Bank of England's annual tests, and the EU-wide tests conducted by the EBA.
So this is serious business, with regulators keeping a close eye on things.
Absolutely. These tests typically involve macroeconomic scenarios defined by the regulators. We're talking significant drops in GDP, spikes in unemployment, major fluctuations in commodity prices. Banks then have to build complex models to see how they would hold up under these challenging conditions, and they have to demonstrate they have enough capital to absorb potential losses.
So the more severe the stress scenario, the more capital they need to have on hand. Makes sense.
And failing those stress tests can have serious consequences. They might get told they can't pay out dividends to shareholders or buy back their own stock. In some cases, they might even face limitations on the types of business they can engage in.
That's a strong incentive to make sure they get their house in order.
It is. But the article highlights that a robust stress testing framework isn't just about the numbers. You need clear roles and responsibilities for who's developing and validating the models, how those scenarios are designed, and how those results are used to inform decision-making. And a strong review process ensures the whole framework is solid.
So it's a multifaceted process with both quantitative and qualitative aspects.
And while we focused on the financial industry, the core principles of stress testing are applicable way beyond just banks.
You mean that idea of pushing an organization to its limits under those adverse conditions?
Exactly. And risk professionals in other industries are starting to catch on. They're adopting and adapting those best practices to fit their specific contexts.
It's about recognizing the value of those lessons learned in one sector and applying them elsewhere.
The article even provides a helpful table that links stress testing to different facets of risk management, from defining objectives and understanding risk tolerance to the crucial steps of identifying risks and figuring out how to manage them. It even touches on using internal audits to provide assurance that the stress testing process itself is sound.
So it really highlights how deeply integrated this kind of testing can and should be within an organization's overall risk management framework.
Finally, let's talk about viability statements. These seem to have emerged in the UK after some high-profile corporate collapses, and they're all about providing stakeholders, investors, employees, the public with a clear picture of a company's overall risk profile and its long-term prospects.
So it's about transparency and accountability, giving those stakeholders a better understanding of the company's ability to weather storms.
Exactly. There was already a requirement for companies to conduct a going concern assessment, but that typically only looked forward 12 months. The Financial Reporting Council in the UK recognized that stakeholders needed a longer-term perspective, and that led to the introduction of a new requirement, a longer-term viability statement in the annual reports of UK-listed companies.
So beyond just surviving the next year, it's about demonstrating sustainability for the long haul.
And these guidelines often influence best practices globally, so this is relevant even outside the UK. The article dives into the FRC's 2018 code, specifically Principle O, which centers around the board's responsibility for managing risk and understanding the principal risks that the company is willing to take.
So it's about the board stepping up and taking ownership of risk management.
Precisely. And that's where those disclosure requirements for viability statements come in. Companies now have to clearly state that the board has conducted a robust assessment of emerging and principal risks.
They can't just say it, they have to demonstrate it.
Exactly. They need to describe those risks, explain their process for identifying new risks, and detail how they are managing or mitigating those identified risks. They also have to explain how they've assessed the company's prospects over a specific period and state whether they have a reasonable expectation that the company will be able to continue operating and meeting its financial obligations over that period.
So it's a comprehensive assessment looking at both the risks and the company's ability to handle those risks.
Right. And there are some important elements to consider here. The time frame, for example.
Yeah.
It can't just be that standard 12-month going concern view. It has to extend beyond that.
So they need to demonstrate that they're thinking long-term, not just focusing on the immediate future.
Precisely. The time frame should be relevant to the business, its operating environment, and encourage a genuinely forward-looking perspective. And then there are those principal risks, the ones that could really shake things up, potentially undermining the company's business model, its financial performance, its solvency, liquidity, or even its reputation.
Those are the big ones, the ones that keep the board up at night.
Exactly. And it's not enough to just list them. They need to explain how they are actively managing and mitigating those risks. The article makes a great point that taking risks is part of doing business, but this statement is an opportunity for the board to show they understand that crucial balance between risk and reward.
It's about demonstrating that they have a plan, that they're not just flying blind.
Right. And managing those everyday risks effectively allows them to focus on those potentially transformative but less frequent events. Another key aspect is considering liabilities in a broad sense. It's not just about paying the bills. It's about the long-term ability to operate successfully and meet all their obligations. This means considering anything that could undermine future performance, impact operational capabilities, or threaten long-term viability.
So it's about looking at the bigger picture, the overall sustainability of the business.
And when it comes to actually making this assessment of viability, the FRC specifically points to stress testing and reverse stress testing as valuable tools.
Reverse stress testing, that's an interesting concept. What exactly is that?
It's about figuring out what kind of extreme shock would actually cause the company to fail. It's a way of identifying those critical vulnerabilities that might not be apparent through more traditional stress testing.
So instead of asking, can we handle this, they're asking, what would break us?
Exactly. It's a powerful approach. The article also mentions different analytical approaches, from qualitative analysis to scenario planning and full-blown quantitative modeling. The choice depends on the complexity of the business and the resources available.
It's about finding the right tools for the job.
The article also mentions a 2020 FRC review of these viability reports, highlighting that regulators are increasingly expecting companies to be transparent about their reasoning if they choose to shorten their assessment period due to uncertainty. And the review emphasized that reports need to clearly link specific scenarios to the most critical risks they face. Vague assurances about managing risks just don't cut it anymore.
So they need to be specific, concrete, and provide real evidence to support their claims.
Exactly. To recap, these viability statements are about the board clearly outlining how they see the company's